Communication and warnings are seen as a priority in any modern-day emergency, equal now to almost all aspects of traditional emergency response. But this hasn't always been the case. With historical roots in military-style command and control, emergency management has undergone massive changes in the last few decades in response to changing hazards, communities, and an appetite for information.
Fire and emergency services were always focused on providing information on an incident, but they saw themselves as in control of that information, and they were the source of that information.
You'll find a period in which a lot of the community-facing messaging included a lot of operational language, a lot of acronyms, a lot of scientific terms, and to most of us in the community don't make any sense at all.
I think one of the challenges, particularly in the early days, was the fact that the community safety groups within agencies were relatively small. They were pretty small compared to the combat side of the business.
At that time, most commentary in relation to fires was all around the media providing advice around how many fire trucks were in attendance, what they were doing in relation to the response. And that commentary provided very little advice to residents around what actions they should be taking. And really, we were, to a large extent, making it up as we went along.
A series of significant and tragic disasters across Australia highlighted the power of warnings to save lives, particularly as the scale and intensity of emergency events became harder to respond to effectively.
I was involved in the review of the Canberra bushfires in 2003, and that was the first occasion I became aware that information is as critical, if not more critical, than the actual operational response.
We know during the very worst of conditions that trucks and aircraft can quite often prove futile in dealing with something like a fire, but something that we do have up our sleeve: warnings. So we can get information and warnings out to the community. And the other big ticket item that we've got is the community, and making sure that the community is informed, that they know what's going on, and they've actually got those preventative steps that we're telling them to take so that people can make informed decisions.
The Victorian Black Saturday bushfires in 2009 were a watershed moment for communication and warnings, and the importance that was subsequently placed on it. However, as the provision of public information evolved within the emergency services, it was soon realised that something was needed to help bridge the gap between the authorities and community.
Research is critical to ensuring that we do have consistent messaging, and that's not a fire and emergency skill set. We need the evidence and the research to provide that, and fire and emergency services are very conscious of that and very receptive to research which helps them in that important role.
One of the key challenges was the unpredictable relationship between warning messages and actions carried out by the public. This was often at odds with the operational structures employed within emergency management, and meant skills and expertise needed to be sourced from outside the field of emergency management.
The expectation that one message framed in one way from one source using one media channel will be equally effective for 100% of the population, or will be able to trigger 100% response, is flawed.
The use of an understanding of the importance of social science as a discipline to bushfire management or fire management was a bit of a wake-up call. To that point, I think fires had always been treated as, that's a fire, it's burning vegetation, it's a command and control structure, we have to go put it out before the community gets impacted. I think what that social science work started to tell us was, which seems obvious today, was that the community is part of that.
In the last Bushfire Natural Hazards CRC program of work, communications and warnings featured very prominently. Prior to this, the focus has been on prevention preparedness and the types of community preparedness actions that people needed to undertake. But what this next phase of the work entailed was a real collaborative approach with the AFAC National Warnings Group, where we could identify what emergency management agency and operational agencies needed in order to ensure that the research was focused on leading to tactical outcomes that the community could use and that emergency managers could actually implement to inform and improve our warnings products.
The knowledge and relationships that have been formed between researchers and emergency services from 2003 to the present are now informing highly effective approaches to emergency communication and warnings, and have become a vital tool in informing and evaluating the impact of emergency information.
I think we've got a really good understanding now for how to actually construct those warning messages and use the right words to actually get the action that we're looking for, but also the timeliness and the way that we actually get that information out to people so that they can confidently make informed decisions which ultimately affect their safety.
There's lots changing in our sector at the moment, and I think from a warnings perspective, probably one of the most exciting pieces of work that's happening is the introduction of the Australian warning system, which will obviously give us national consistency in how we're delivering warnings across the country and also across hazards. That will bring huge benefits to the community. It will be a fantastic piece for us as emergency services agencies. It definitely presents some challenges that we'll need to work through, but I think the opportunities are enormous.
We like to think that we're pretty good at getting information and warnings out as an industry, and we've certainly come a long way in more than a decade, but there's always improvements, and I think through the expertise that rests within the emergency services, the expertise coming from the research organisations, but also the expertise coming from the end users, the community, is really important. We saw during the 2019-20 bushfire season, given the scale of the impact across New South Wales and the impact on the community, that based on that kind of loss across New South Wales, we should have seen about 150 people lose their lives during those fires. But because of the effort of firefighters on the ground, the emergency managers, but also the critical role of information and warnings, we didn't face that kind of loss, and I think it's a real testament to where we've come from and where we're going in the future as well.
Innovation and change are essential in the communication and warning space, and this means keeping up to date with the latest knowledge and information. This documentary series highlights communications and warnings research from the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC. Through the series, we'll be following 4 communications and engagement practitioners from different sectors as they meet with researchers and find out how they can apply this knowledge to their own work. Starting with disaster education in schools, we'll be looking at a project on Melbourne's suburban fringe that provides primary students with the skills and autonomy to ask their own questions about bushfire safety. We'll learn how pets and animals can be the perfect starting point to engage people around emergency preparedness. We'll meet with the multidisciplinary team in Queensland who are using marketing psychology to identify more effective emergency communications. And in New South Wales, we'll find out what goes through the minds of people who drive through dangerous floodwaters and how this can help emergency services to create more effective communication campaigns. Finally, we'll travel to Victoria's Surf Coast to find out about the long-term impacts that disasters can have on communities and what the research suggests are the best ways to help with preparedness and recovery. By joining our communication and warnings practitioners on their journey of discovery, you too can share in the knowledge and incorporate the learnings into your work, ensuring that your decisions are based upon the best available evidence.